Welcome everyone to a gravy unpacked conversation around spaced out, um, diving into investing and working in the space industry. My name is Brandon Jones, the founder of Gravy. Gravy is a community that is focused on building generational wealth, particularly for underrepresented folks. We have a community itself which lives on Slack and LinkedIn. We have an investment syndicate that focuses on getting access for folks to interesting investment opportunities that fit their goals, where they may not have access otherwise. We also have a newsletter that dives into wealth topics and a conversation series, which you're a part of right now. So thank you for joining us. We're going to hop right in. So first, I want to start off by saying thank you to William and Justus. We have Will Drewery and Justus Killian joining us for this conversation. Justus is a partner at Space Capital, which is a early stage investor in space companies. We have Will Drewery, who's a VP of supply chain at Astra, which is a public American launch vehicle company based in California. I know both of these gentlemen for years, and it is a pleasure to have you both. So welcome to Justus and Will. Before we get started, got to put a disclaimer out there. We are not giving investment advice. We are not, giving you, things to do or we're vouching for. This is all about educational purposes, helping folks really understand the dynamics of the industry and what it's like working in the industry. So please do not take this as professional investment advice. Have to do that disclaimer. With that being said, gentlemen, let's start off. Maybe Justus, you can go first. Tell us, in a minute or so, a little bit about your background and why you decided to focus your career on the space industry.
Sure, Brandon. Thanks so much for having me here. Excited to talk about space. So my background started out working with institutional investors, big foundations, endowments, pension funds. I saw the willingness for those large holders of assets to take bigger bets on the future, both in terms of impactful companies and missions, and using venture as a tool to help create some of those outcomes. I then spent the next decade or so of my career helping invest and build in companies across East Africa and South Asia. This included mobile banking systems, distributed energy, and agriculture companies. Then had an opportunity to hit pause and ask sort of where I thought the biggest opportunity was that, to reach every person, every object on the planet. And, space is inherently that. It is an incredibly powerful tool to help us fight and address some of the biggest challenges we're facing. So had the opportunity to join with my partners at Space Capital and have been doing that since. So it's a quick summary.
Appreciate it. Will, same question.
Yeah, first of all, a huge thank you to you, Brandon, for having us on. And thanks for joining us, Justus. I'll give a quick intro myself. My name is Will Drewery. I'm the VP of supply chain at Astra Space. And we're a company, as Brandon mentioned, that launches. We provide launch services for satellite companies. And we also make space products. So space products, people ask, what are those? Space products are things like thrusters for satellites. So you can think of them as like little tiny engines that you strap onto a satellite that can move them from place to place in space. So just, really thinking about all the things that are needed in order to enable this space economy. That's one of the things that has really gotten my interest and being here at Astra. I think we are really on the cusp of some amazing things over the next decade. We're starting to build the infrastructure that people are going to build space services and constellations for communicating, sending images, doing all sorts of things that we today can't even imagine. I make the analogy to the advent of the internet back in the 90s. Most people back then couldn't imagine the things that we're doing on the internet today. And I think the same goes for space services. So when I think about all the things that have gotten me interested in this industry, I've always been a huge space geek. I've also kind of carved a career for myself in supply chain. Really quickly, I mean, I started my career in management consulting. I worked in the DC area. I was tapped for a project to work in manufacturing in Baghdad, Iraq, of all places. And it was just such an eye-opening experience for me to work with factory owners and directors, making all sorts of really useful things for the people in that area. I advanced in my career working at Tesla. So I spent about 5 years building new manufacturing plants with the Tesla team. I was responsible for brokering some of the largest deals that the company had ever done at that time. Spent billions of dollars building new manufacturing lines and facilities. And I was really just looking for a way to use those skills that I developed in various industries and apply them to something that was going to take us into a new age. So Astra has very much lived up to that expectation. And I think the best times are ahead of us.
Nice. And look, I know Will, he's a smart guy. So, his thought process is something, that one can clearly assume there's a lot of opportunity. Justus, coming back to you, you decided, where the opportunity was. You thought, space was a great place to kind of, focus your energies. How did you specifically choose Space Capital, the team that you partner with to focus your energies with? I'm thinking from the perspective of folks that may say, I do think there's an opportunity there. How should they go about vetting the team, the company, the firm that they're actually, kind of joining to pursue that work?
Yeah, great question. When you are an investor, particularly at the early stages, so much of your criteria, so much of what you're betting on is a team to realize a vision. When you're looking at an investment manager, particularly venture capital, it's even more so about the team. And in particular with space, it really is not only about the network that you have, which is just absolutely critical to venture investing, who you know, what they've done, experience in the ecosystem and with the technology, but it is a technical understanding to be able to vet and assess, does the physics even close on this problem set, right? And you would be surprised at how many opportunities are out there where just, the physics don't even make sense. And, pretty quickly you can, pass on that. So I had the opportunity to join with what I believe are, two of probably the smartest and sort of longest track record, investors in this area. Tom Ingersoll, he has built and exited multiple companies in the space ecosystem. His first company was called Universal Space Network, which is a ground segment business. And then his second company was Skybox Imaging, which was acquired by Google back in 2014. And it was really one of the first proof points in this ecosystem that space tech could scale and achieve a venture-like outcome. And so, working with Tom as an engineer and an operator, he brings a tremendous amount to the table. Working with Chad, stood up one of the first innovation centers in the UK focused on space tech. It's called the Catapult Accelerator, using government funding to help accelerate the development of commercial technology. He had built one of the most developed track records in space tech by the time I joined with him back in 2015. So, he had that pattern recognition, that learning, that sort of, early access to opportunities. And both of those things matter. It's that financial knowledge, that network, and then the expertise, operational knowledge and technical capability that really got me excited to join these guys. And I was fortunate enough to have a skill set that was complementary to what they had. And that was really important with my addition to the team. So
Appreciate that. Will, how did the Astra opportunity come to be for you? That's the first side of the question. The second piece of it is, when you are evaluating the pros and cons and the financial considerations, many folks are looking at the upside, but they also need to reconcile it with their cost of living, maybe having a family. I know all these things are true for you. Can you kind of help us understand how, the Astra opportunity, was the one for you, and what were your kind of financial considerations?
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. So this opportunity at Astra actually came about through one of my neighbors, to be quite honest. So I've been living in the city of Alameda, where Astra is located, for a few years now, and they've been just kind of operating as a stealth space company for a number of years. And it turns out that, as they were starting to advance in their development and to prove more success of the products, they were looking to scale their operations and make more rockets in a short amount of time. So, the practice or the function of supply chain really lends itself to companies that are trying to scale their production and to make more units of the thing that they have a proof of concept on. I would say most people prior to 2020 didn't have an appreciation or an understanding of what supply chain is, but really supply chain is the sourcing and transport of all the goods and materials that it requires to make the products and getting those products ultimately to the market. The second part of your question, so you asked about just like balancing things. So I know that Brandon and I, we talk about this all the time, is we're parents of young children, heads of household, and just trying to do the best that we can for our families while keeping a high performance track record at work. I'll tell you that it's not for the faint of heart, but for sure, it's I would say there are huge careers to be built in these spaces, industries and functions like supply chain. They pay really well. And that's been one of the things that's been, able to kind of sustain me. I would say, and I think Brandon would second this, but also having great partners. My wife has put up with multiple moves and career transitions that haven't always made sense to her or to me even at the time. And really just having someone there that has your back and that is able to partner with you and complement you in areas where you may not be strong.
Love it, love it. All right, switching gears a little bit, Justus. So I've known Justus for maybe 3 or so years now. I would almost consider him a mentor in the space investing arena. A lot of my, I made a few space investments. They were made through a platform that, I essentially came to Justus to ask all my questions. And one of the things I really respect about Justus is he has a very efficient way of explaining complex ideas. And so I'm going to give you the challenge of really helping folks explain what they need to know at the highest level about the space industry structurally. What's the historical context that's important to frame where we are today? What are the specific sub areas that are driving the growth, now and into the future? And then maybe some misconceptions that folks have that you could address, through this along the way around investing in space.
That's a big question. I'll try to cover it as well as I can. The most important thing I think for people to know is we've been going to space for commercial purposes and scientific purposes for more than 50 years. This is several $100 billion a year industry when you only look at launch and satellite. So there's a very established way of doing things. And people have made a lot of money already on this industry and the opportunity sets that it's enabled. I think the most important thing to sort of really start with is to re-anchor your expectations. So when people say space, they often think of the Apollo landing, the International Space Station, or maybe a billionaire trying to travel to Mars. But all of that has to do with humans in space. That's not the investment landscape. The real investable opportunity here is about data collection. Data is being launched by rockets, that's captured by satellites that orbit around our Earth. And that information comes back down here to Earth to help us drive our economies and live our everyday lives. And there's really three major verticals within those sort of satellite instruments. The first is GPS, and that's the most ubiquitous. If space had a killer app, GPS is that killer app. It's been around since the 80s. The first sort of big exits happened with companies in the 90s called Magellan, Trimble, Garmin, TomTom. These were the originators of turn-by-turn navigation. You could go back to the days in early 2000s when Qualcomm made the GPS One chip enabled in our mobile phones. And then Apple added a software layer over that that made it very easy for developers to embed location awareness into all of our movements and everything that we do. And that tech stack that emerged really allowed a tremendous amount of innovation. Software developers, not even knowing that they were tapping into space-based assets, being able to determine when and where and how to, circumnavigate the globe, allows our food to be delivered, our taxis to be on time, our logistics to be coordinated, our communications infrastructure to be timed, our financial systems to be operated in the way that they do. So GPS really is an incredibly powerful tool, and there's a lot of opportunity still there. The second major vertical is within geospatial intelligence or Earth observation. And this is satellites that are using, taking much more complex imagery of the Earth. So this could be pictures, it could be radar, it could be multispectral wavelengths that help us understand the composition of physical surface down here on Earth. And we're just at the very early days of being able to understand this information. Usually governments would use it for military operations, or scientists would use it to help us understand climate variables and climate change. But now commercial operations, from mining to energy production to shipping to, really real estate, insurance, are now beginning to use these tools to actually digitize a lot of their operations. You don't send people out to monitor assets. You don't send people out to check how things have changed. Satellites will give you that information in near real time. And then the last major vertical is satellite communications. And this can be low throughput IoT or high throughput systems, which are basically like fiber lines anywhere on the planet. And we're getting to a point where all of these technologies are converging to help all of our devices and our entire world actually become digitized. So Will's analogy at the beginning, which was around the opportunity is really similar to the scale of the internet. I totally agree. And what we're doing with this space technology is not about moving information only, but it's more about digitizing our physical world. How do we understand what's happening, and how do all these pieces get together? And how do we make a queryable Earth in a way that allows us to build and grow in a much faster way? So that's at a high level. That's 95% of what's out there. There is also this opportunity that's emerging that's really about using the on-orbit zero gravity environment to manufacture things that could be valuable back here on Earth. And space has a long history of spinning out great technology that can be used back down here on Earth. But this could be, bio, like printing organs or developing bio, treatments. It could be fiber optic cables, and there's a number of examples. There's also the opportunity to start to discover other planetary bodies, and if there's natural resources there, or if there's data there that's potentially valuable. And these are farther off. These are more complicated. Living and working in space, but that frontier is becoming a reality, particularly as larger launch vehicles come online and make that possible. So it's a lot. I'm just going to pause there.
No, I loved it. And again, I think you did a great job of taking 50 years of context and boiling it down to less than 5 minutes. One follow-up question I want to ask you is, one big shift I know that's happened in the space industry is a lot of the innovation was funded by governments. And now you're seeing, for the first time, again, governments are largely funding, but you're seeing a lot more private commercial activity happening in the space. Can you speak to what that does in terms of the trajectory of change in the space industry? Is that a tipping point? How should that, how should we be thinking about that change from?
Well, I think it's important to realize where governments have been really helpful. So that government funding that has been used to develop the technology, the sensors, the hardware, they call this raising the technology readiness level. That R&D, from going to a concept, to a lab, to early testing, to then on-orbit demonstration, that's where government funding has been super, super helpful and helped keep, sort of the US ecosystem ahead of every country in terms of what space capabilities we have. Private capital is now coming on top of that and saying, we already have a lot of really great technology. How do we do this better, faster, and cheaper? And that's where people are thinking about, building much more efficient supply chains, optimizing engine performance, bringing software-defined tool sets into, the technology. So, repurposing hardware as opposed to just like putting it up there once, using it once, and then discarding it. So those private market incentives are forcing, it creates a form of, I would just say, more innovation and a willingness to sort of go faster and take a little bit bigger bet. And so that's where the two are playing, and they're very complementary.
Thank you. Appreciate that. A lot of information packed in there. By the way, audience, feel free to ask questions. We will take questions towards the end of the session. So if anything you want to double click on, let us know. Will, we've heard you. You work in supply chain. You're an exec at an exciting space company. But what exactly do you do? Can you walk us through a day in the life?
Yeah, that's for sure. First of all, I was like really just loving Justus's overview of the industry. I could second everything he just mentioned. We see a huge opportunity for for all the space applications. Supply chain. So as I was kind of mentioning earlier, it's a very broad industry or very broad function. The way you can think about what we do, or just to give you a snapshot of some of the things that I typically work on, are so first is just sourcing, and what that means is just purchasing of raw materials, all the parts that you need to make whatever product you're building. We have a whole team of people whose specific job it is to go out and to work with suppliers to find exactly the right supplier to make the thing, the module, the PCBA, whatever it is that we need to in order to make our rockets or our space thrusters. So that team, what they do is really specialized. I mean, there is definitely a business part to what they do, where they're going out and negotiating, low cost, short lead times, other things with the suppliers and getting contracts in place. But the other part of what they do is really diving into the technical details of whatever it is we're building. So one of the capabilities that I think is really changing the way we do things in the aerospace industry is manufacturing engineering. So I'm not sure, some people might not be familiar with what that is. Essentially, manufacturing engineering is the practice of thinking of better ways to make something, or what's the right manufacturing process you want to use to fabricate a piece. There are things that are really commonly understood, things like metal forming and casting, where you pour molten metal into a cast. You pop it open and you have the form factor for whatever it is you want. But also now there are new technologies hitting the market, things like metal 3D printing, carbon composites. There are all sorts of different ways to build things. And that's one of the areas that I see innovation happening and taking place. The other parts of what I do, my team not only manages the sourcing of parts and components, but also refurbishing our facilities and purchasing capital equipment, manufacturing equipment that we use to build the rockets. And once those rockets are actually built, there is the transportation aspect of supply chain, where we're responsible for getting the rocket from our manufacturing plant in Alameda, California, out to wherever we're launching in Kodiak, Alaska, or Cape Canaveral, Florida. It really just depends on where the customers want to go. And I'll put a bookmark in that, because I think that's really something that Astra is focused on that's different than most other companies in the industry. But when we think about just transporting things, it's really, I could underscore how difficult it is to transport anything that's large. But if it's large and also potentially hazardous, or they're dangerous goods like oxygen and things like that, then there's a fair amount of work that needs to be done with with transportation authorities to make sure that you can get your goods from point A to point B with as little friction as possible, as safely as possible, and on time so that you can meet your launch schedule. So I'll talk about the part of what Astra does, and then I do have a special treat. I have a few pictures that I can show of our facility and some of the products that we make.
Nice.
So I'm happy to show that. But I also think it's worth underscoring one of the things that Astra is focused on, because some people ask, like, their SpaceX is already out there. Why is anyone working on launch services when you have a provider out there? And the quick answer is SpaceX is doing a great job of getting as many satellites into space as they possibly can. But the short of it is that it's not nearly enough for what the industry needs. So there are lots of companies that are focused on building satellites that they want to deploy into constellations, and doing all of the things that Justus mentioned in his overview. So companies like Astra are focused on dedicated launches that go directly into orbits that our companies want to be in. And if you're a layman like I was when I entered this industry, you might not even realize that there are different orbits. So there's the distance from the Earth, low Earth orbit, and geostationary orbit. In the industry, you might hear LEO or GEO as the orbit, and that tells you how far away from the Earth you are. So for some things like telescopes and other really large satellites, they need to be geostationary, really far away from the Earth. But if you're doing mapping and imaging for a company that needs that, you want to be as close to the Earth as possible. And if you're going to be enabling GPS and other communications technologies, you want to be as close to the Earth as possible. So that's the distance that we're focused on. But there are also equatorial orbits where you might want to go around the equator of the Earth. And in that case, you want to launch from a place that's closer to the Earth's equator. And there are polar orbits where you might want to cover as much ground over the Earth as possible with every passing rotation. And so that's a reason why a customer might decide that they want to be launched into a polar orbit. So, I mean, all of these things are, I barely knew these things before I got into this industry, but the more you unpack the blockers to why companies aren't able to deploy the type of technology that they want to deploy, the more you realize that there are so many business propositions out there. And I would say that the harvest is large, but the workers are few. So we need more people in this industry to help advance that and to tackle some of these really difficult problems.
There's a need.
There is definitely a need.
All right, show us some goodies.
I'll show you some goodies. All right, let's see. Here's some pictures. So we recently hosted a Space Tech Day at our facility, and it's available on YouTube. But I thought that this would be a good overview, or a good place to start, at least for some of the things that we're working on here at Astra. What you're looking at is actually some pictures of our manufacturing facility in Alameda. It was formerly a naval part of a naval base that we refurbished and repurposed for the purpose of building rockets and other space products. So these are some before pictures. This is some work in progress. And what you can see here is newly finished space. Nice. Hundreds of thousands of square feet that we use to produce our rockets. You can see some of the parts that we have. We have sheet metal and welding technicians that work on welding our rockets together. We use some robotic automation to help automate the production of rockets because we need to make many of them. And just some shots of work getting done around the factory. I'm going to fast forward to one of the really cool space products that we are working on. And this is our space thrusters that are actually in very high demand because there are lots of satellite makers that want to deploy their satellites into orbit, and they just don't have the means of getting there. So what these are they're tiny engines that we strap to the back of satellites, and they propel them from one orbit into another. So if you're in close to the orbit that you want to be, but not exactly, you can use one of these tiny space engines that we call ace thrusters to get you into the orbit that you need to be in. I could go on and on about,
how much does one of those bad boys cost? Can you share?
If you want to know, I do have a sales team that can reach out. You have lots of customers that reach out and ask for pricing. And because I know you, Brandon, I'll be willing to give you a nice discount.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Hey, man, thank you for giving us that insight. Definitely, kind of giving us that true, understanding of what you're doing, and also the pictures. I think definitely kind of, they speak 1,000 words. So appreciate that, Will. That was a great addition. Justus, you see a lot of deals. You see a lot of exciting stuff. I'm curious to know, what are you most excited about right now? Either something in the portfolio that's really taken off, or a new kind of a new emerging technology within the space industry that you really feel excitement around.
Yeah, I'll highlight 3 companies that I think are really interesting to pay attention to. The first company is, you almost wouldn't think of them as a space company, because they are a marketplace for Earth observation data. So, Will mentioned Astra is putting satellites up there. Some of those are going to be taking pictures of the Earth. There's going to be some existing satellites that are already up there that are providing images. The government has provided free public satellites that have been capturing data for decades you can tap into. The reality is, there isn't one location. If you're a data scientist or a developer looking to answer big, complicated questions using this imagery, there is no one source to go to. So you have to go to many different satellite operators. You have to negotiate contracts with them. Many of them have minimum purchase requirements, and they're going to send you then raw pixels, so raw images, and you're going to have to then structure that, process it, clean it, and try to integrate it into your workflow. All that's really complicated. It's really hard to get the information you want. So a company that we invested in called Skywatch, they are a marketplace for these imagery providers. And so they can sell their data through an API. So whatever you're looking for, time, resolution, temporal and spatial coverage, you can send that request through an API. It can be tasked to a satellite on orbit, and you can actually associate a price with it, letting people know how in demand it is for what you want. And so if it already exists, you pay what's available, but you could tell somebody, hey, this is really important information, I need it now. And a satellite could go out there and then they compete for actually getting you that information. And then it's integrated directly into your workflow through an API, and you don't have to deal with any contract negotiation. So, that sounds like a software business. it is. A lot of that software, but it's exciting. It's addressing a really critical bottleneck that exists in sort of that tech stack. And it's allowing more and more developers and application, focused software to be created. So that's one that's very practical.
What series is that company at right now?
They have raised a Series B. Their next round would be a Series C. Yeah.
All right. What else you got?
The next one is, so oftentimes if you dig in and pay a little bit of attention to what's going on in space, you're going to see headlines that are about space debris and the world is crashing down, and it's a risk for that environment that could have a cascading effect, and if we don't get ahead of it, it would be very hard to control. It actually grows exponentially. So historically, the U.S. Air Force has provided radar information about what satellites are on orbit and where they're at. And the resolution of this imagery is very crude. It doesn't give us a good idea of all the debris that's happening and what all is up there. And so you actually don't have an understanding of what the risk profile looks like. If you have a satellite, do you need to move it? So a company we invested in years ago They spun out of Stanford Research Institute with probably $100 million in IP that was developed. This goes back to that government funding and technology development. It's called Leo Labs, and they've been able to develop radar that provides 2 centimeter resolution in terms of what they're able to detect on orbit. And it's a step change in terms of anything that's out there. And what they're now able to do is they provide a full service on top of that information. So if you own a satellite, you can get an alert that says, hey, there's a potential risk coming at you. Think about this and move your spacecraft. So that's a really interesting one. I would say that is probably one of the most immediate new emerging markets, is what we call space situational awareness and debris mitigation. There aren't a lot of customers yet, but it is a growing problem. And if the regulatory environment changes, it could be a really large opportunity. The last one that I'll highlight is really far out there, and it's pretty exciting to talk about. It's a company called Lunar Outpost. And we worked with this company for over 12 months to figure out how they take a rover, a robotics platform developed here on Earth, and harden it for the environments of space to be able to navigate the lunar surface and survive the lunar night. And they have made tremendous progress. They've won contracts with NASA and their CLIPS program, which is a very sort of large committed pool of contracts to help buy services from commercial providers. This is a similar program to what got SpaceX to where it is today. So they're applying that same approach to the moon. And we worked with them to think about their product, not only to serve the lunar surface, but to use that technology development and that complexity in what they're developing to also serve industries here on Earth that work in really extreme environments. So think about energy and mining, where you have to monitor pipelines or navigate some pretty crazy environments. And that's what they're doing. So they're able to sell and generate revenue. We invested in their seed round, so they're much earlier at this point. And they've got half of their revenue stream is coming from their contracts to deliver to the lunar surface, and half of it's coming from here on Earth from customers that are using it for operations here. So 3 very different examples, all pretty fun and at different levels of development.
Love it. Those are some exciting examples. And I know you see a lot of really, really cool stuff in your seat, and appreciate you sharing what you're excited about. All right, so folks are excited. They know a little bit about the industry, the history, got a day in their life, saw some cool labs. They want to get into the mix, right? They want to get involved. Let's kind of walk them through step by step, and I'll start with you, Will. If someone is interested in working at a company like Astra, what should they be doing? How can they be connected in? What types of roles or profiles is a company like Astra looking for?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll start with just some of the profiles that we're looking for. So, people love to joke with me that they think I'm a rocket scientist. I would say I work with lots of rocket scientists. They're all amazing people, but you do not have to be a rocket scientist to work in this industry. We need all sorts of people that are focused on doing lots of different things. So on my side, there's no way I would pass this opportunity without putting a plug for supply chain. We need very skilled supply chain people to help source, transport, and manage the relationships with suppliers and partners that we have in this industry. We also have roles like program management, product management, people that come from the tech industry and that have a real competency toward that. Are great for companies like this, because we're managing lots of different programs with different roadmaps and different customers. So there's certainly a need there. Speaking of customers, there's also the business side of things. There is a real sales pipeline for things like space products and launch services. So if you are familiar with selling to commercial customers for something like this, hardware products, I would say that, that's something that should be of interest. There's also a more niche angle of selling to governments. And that's another thing, if you have that skill set and have some experience with working through government RFQ processes, then that's like just a great place to start and a great place to continue your career. When I think about ways to get into this industry, there's really no there's no replacement for just person-to-person networking. If you don't know anyone else in the industry, you're on this webinar. Now you know me. I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can feel free to reach out to me. The companies, especially in the investing space, I've seen that they are hosting networking events, some virtual, some in person. I attended one yesterday and I met companies that are doing all kinds of crazy things, smelting metal on orbit, 3D printing in space, just like everything that you can imagine. So, I would just first encourage people to think about the transferable skills that they have. What is it that you've been training your whole career to do? And also, like, what is that industry really good at? When I think about this role, and when I was on the phone with the CEO of Astra, Chris Kemp, I just remember that phone call very vividly. And I remember telling him, possibly to my detriment, that I don't know anything about building rockets. And he said, that's exactly what I want. You are an automotive guy. There's no industry that has figured out how to build complex products in a very simple way than the automotive industry. We want to use the types of manufacturing processes, the same types of systems for management of resources and planning as companies like that do. So that was actually really to my benefit to bring something from an industry that I know very well, where I kind of developed that skill set, to a company that is really looking to do things differently than the status quo. So again, I just really implore people to think about what it is that you do, what do you do well, the industry that you come from, what is it that the space tech industry could possibly have to learn from you. And by the time you've gotten to that point, you've really created your own value proposition for the why you should be in this space.
Love that. So you're saying you don't need to be a rocket scientist, one. If you don't know anybody, you can find Will on LinkedIn, two. And three, there's a lot of skill sets that you may already have that could be applicable to the industry. So that's really useful. Justus, for someone who is interested on the investing side, and I would also add, you are interacting with a lot of companies at different stages, and so you have a feel for what they're looking for. What would you advise folks to do if they're interested in the industry?
I mean, like I started out saying, this industry has been around for 50 plus years, and it was stagnant for many of those decades. So it's changed because new people with different perspectives, different backgrounds, different skill sets came in and thought about doing something differently. And what this industry requires to reach its full potential is more of that. So I think it's really important to not feel like because you don't have an advanced hardware engineering degree, you wouldn't have a place here. There is definitely room for that. Some of the roles that I help recruit for across our portfolio and across the ecosystem is actually on the legal side. There's a tremendous amount of need from a legal and regulatory perspective to be able to do this work. On the software engineering side, whether it be working software that talks to the hardware components and helps control that, tremendous opportunity in mechatronics. Or if it's actually then the data science side, actually trying to understand the information coming off of these instruments, and making it accessible to software developers and application specialists downstream. So, don't be intimidated by all the smoke, all the fire, and the history of this industry. There is an opportunity, there is a place for you, and it's actually essential that people like you with a different background come into this industry and propel it forward.
Appreciate that. Appreciate that, Justice. So we're going to shift gears a little bit. At the end of the day, Gravy is about wealth, building generational wealth, helping people understand how to make decisions around that, referencing other folks' point of view around that. And so I want to shift gears a little bit. I want to go to Will. I'm going to go to you first. We had a Gravy talk around strategic side hustles. One of them obviously would be board membership, in which you get to get executive level insight into the operations, the goals, the vision, the strategy, the hiring of a company. You also get to network and ultimately build equity or also get some compensation along the way. Very strategic. I know you sit on the board. Can you tell us a little bit more about that experience and how that's kind of played into your portfolio of wealth creation?
Yeah, absolutely. So Brandon's referring to a board that I sit on for a company called Mitra Chem. So Mitra is developing novel battery cathodes for the electric vehicle market. And if you don't know what that means, essentially you have a battery cathode that is really it's the most important part of the battery. It's what holds the charge of a battery. And today in the electric vehicle market, most companies, like your Tesla, your Rivians, all the companies that people know and love, they use a battery type that uses lots of rare earth minerals. It is difficult to source. So from a supply chain perspective, it's one of the contributing factors to why it's so hard to find, to make new EVs. And this company, Mitra, is really focused on making those battery cells from more easy to find minerals. They're much less expensive. And we are hoping to do that without taking a hit to the performance. So the CEO of that company is a friend and former colleague of mine named Vivas Kumar. And Vivas is one of just a brilliant guy when it comes to managing and building supply chains. So when he told me he was starting this company, I was just thrilled that he wanted me to be a part of his board to help advise him on how to build it. So really, when I think about board service, I think about it much the same way that I think about just taking on a job in my career. I really am focused first on where can I contribute value. What do I have to give and contribute to this company to help it grow and to be successful. The insights are great. It's great to have a high level view and knowledge of how companies work. But really, at the end of the day, it's about that wealth creation for all of the people who are involved in making that company successful. Brandon, maybe that's a good plug for a future Gravy podcast webinar, battery technology, because I think there's some really cool things happening in that space. So yeah, that's one of the things that I'm interested in a side hustle that I'm hoping pays dividends in the future.
Noted. And I might take you up on that offer. We're all about going deep into these interesting futuristic opportunities. Justus, all right, switching gears a tad bit. We just want to understand, I think it's actually really interesting because you're sitting in a seat where you're seeing what's happening in the economy right now, a lot of interesting stuff coming into play. For yourself personally, when you think about wealth creation, you have excitement in the space, but also, at the end of the day, you're a capitalist. How are you thinking about your own portfolio right now? And it's not to give advice, it's really how are you kind of assessing your role as an investor and exposure to private market companies? How do you reconcile that with public equities, other kind of areas of investment? What's your own personal strategy there?
Well, I've invested. I started out my career working with big institutions and investing across many different buckets. And one of the major reasons I got involved with the private markets is, particularly as an investor, you have the ability to learn from patterns and see patterns over time. And at the earliest stages, you have the ability to share that knowledge and support a really incredible team to help increase their likelihood of success. And so to see those patterns, to be able to see around corners and to share that with a great team, whether it be at a board level or just as an advisor or as an investor, you really can actually have an outsized influence. And so when I think about how that translates then into my own sort of personal, investment strategy, I mean, I would say 40% of what I own is in the private markets. A large part of being a venture investor, you have to have skin in the game. So I have financial commitments alongside the limited partners that invest alongside me. So a large part of my wealth is tied up in the companies that I'm investing in. The other 40% is in stocks, and then 20% is in cash. And so that's a pretty risky allocation. So I'm playing for the long term here, and hoping that some of it pays off.
Thank you. Appreciate that transparency. I would argue 20% in cash, is actually less risky than many folks. But it's great to kind of get that perspective of how you're thinking about it. Will, same question for you.
Yeah, so I have a lot of my assets. They're primarily in cash right now. I would actually say I'm more toward 80%. And I know in a high inflation environment, that's like still you're losing some of the upside, but with the equity markets in the shape that they are, I think I'm glad that I made that move earlier on. A much bigger portion of my potential wealth is somewhat tied into public equity, and then also some of the private equity. I've got some skin in the game in on the company that I sit on the board of, as well as with my current company Astra. And I think a lot of people are familiar with the way that tech companies compensate, but typically you have a salary component to your total equity, as well as restricted stock units that you get as equity that's contributed to you. And then on a certain vesting schedule, you get to reap some of that, some of those RSUs. And I would say, it's a great way to build wealth. If you're not able to, let's say, afford huge stakes of a company up front. I know people that have become multi-millionaires from my time at Tesla, and it's you certainly don't always know how things are going to shake out with the company, but it's great. It's a great way for companies to ensure that your incentives are aligned with where the company is going.
Wise words, a lot of wisdom right there. All right, we got 5 minutes left. I'm going to take a couple of audience questions, and then we're going to do rapid fire, and then we're going to close out. So the big popular question here, Will, is can people get a tour of Astra? Is that something that's open to the public? And if not, where would you route folks to get a tour of a?
Yeah, I wish people had asked a few weeks ago. We actually recently hosted a community day where we opened up our doors and we were able to walk people through the factory. One of the things about Astra is that, and with all rocket companies, is that they're what they call ITAR, International Trade and Arms Regulated, which means that basically, if you squint really hard, a rocket looks a lot like a missile. And so the US government wants to be very controlled about who they share that information with. So assuming that you meet the requirements to be an ITAR eligible person, or we as a company put away all the stuff that we don't want outside countries to see, like we do on our community days, then I'd be happy to host a tour. So I'll communicate more information through you when that opportunity is open.
Appreciate it, Will. Justus, estimate. One of the questions were around what share of the industry revenue is around government contracting? How has that changed over time, and how is it expected to change?
Yeah, the industry was largely dominated by the government. So when we talk about the 80s, 90s, that was, I would say, 80% plus government related contracts. Today, it's less than a third. I think the last numbers that I saw were in 2019. So, 2/3 commercial use cases, a third government use cases, and the trend is more towards commercial use cases.
Got it. Thank you. All right, rapid fire. I'm going to ask a question and then call out a name. Give us the first thing that comes to mind. Will, what is your favorite book?
Favorite book?
Or interesting book that you've read recently?
Interesting book. I like a friend recommended this to me, and it's like been just a recurring book throughout my career as the first 90 days. And it talks about just some of the things that you do when you're getting into a new role or promoted. And so, even in especially in a case like Astra, where I had to build a supply chain team from scratch, that was one that I went back to from a decade ago.
The go-to. Justus, same question.
For this podcast or for this conversation specifically, a book called The Origin of Wealth. I'm an economics geek. This is a very different way. It's a complex dynamic systems way of understanding economics. And it's, I think, really powerful.
I like that. Same question, but podcasts. Will, what podcasts are you listening to?
Oh man, I like Reid Hoffman. What is the name of it?
Masters of Scale.
Masters of Scale. Yes.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I've also been listening to Chamath Palihapitiya's All In. Yeah, so he's a co-director of mine. So I always have to be up on the latest.
Nice. Very nice. Justus, same question.
I listen to the Journal podcast every day. It's nice sort of business summary of what's going on, and I'm a longtime fan of This American Life. Great storytelling, gotta love it. So,
got it. Will, what is a go-to success ritual for you? So every day, what's something that you need to do to have one of your best days?
Man, my best days always start with a workout. So people who know me, they know that I reserve my mornings for doing that. I have no regrets or apologies about it, but that gets my heart rate going, and it gets my mind in the same state of focus as my body is.
Love it. Justus.
I love drinking tea, so it sort of gives me a space to sort of think and center myself, and sort of get that focus before I dive into things.
Will, what would you be doing if you weren't doing what you do at Astra?
This is what I want to do. No, funny story. I literally spend my time learning about just really complex astrophysics. I fall asleep almost every night watching something about particle physics, space-time, all sorts of just really fascinating topics. It's just a way for me to expand my mind and to think about things that are just on the edge of my realm of understanding.
Love it. Justus, same question.
I mean, I think I would have been a scientist. Like Will, I love understanding physics and all these, sort of big questions and trying to answer them. So if it wasn't business, it would have been science. Yeah.
All right, there you have it. We are at time. I want to again express, a lot of gratitude to Will and Justus for taking the time to educate us on the space industry. You can find them. I guess, Justus, do you have a Twitter or something you can put out there if folks want to connect?
Yeah, the best way to get at me is our website, spacecapital.com, and all the LinkedIn and Twitter stuff is all there. So yeah.
Okay. Will, you want to throw out a Twitter?
I'm Willie D84. I'm not very active on Twitter. I'm more of a consumer than a broadcaster.
LinkedIn guy.
I'm a LinkedIn guy.
Yeah.
And I'm just Will Drewery or William Drewery on LinkedIn. So feel free to look me up and hit me up.
Appreciate it. Thank you to the audience for joining us. Again, we do these conversations every month, diving into various wealth and investing topics. We have a whole ecosystem of resources, so make sure you plug in. Go to gravywealth.com. Thank you again to Will and Justus. We had a great time. And everyone take care. Have a great rest of your day.